You're lucky I'm not firing you, my manager sneered, demoting me to the basement for reporting fraud. I burst out laughing and replied, "Perfect, you just triggered my payout clause." He laughed until the escrow bank confirmed $120 million had left their account. The conference room went dead silent. "You're lucky I'm not firing you." Jason sneered across the mahogany conference table, sliding the demotion letter toward me. "You'll keep your badge, but from now on, you'll be working in the basement with the audit interns." His grin was the kind of smug expression I'd seen on men who thought power was permanent. The HR director, Claire, avoided my eyes. The company lawyer, Mitchell, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I looked down at the letter. Performance and compliance reassignment due to behavioral misalignment. Corporate poetry for "we're burying you alive." Then I laughed quietly at first, then louder. Jason's grin faltered. "Something funny, Amanda." "Perfect," I said, pushing my chair back slowly. "Because the second you signed that letter, you just triggered my payout clause." The room froze. Mitchell frowned. "What payout clause?" I reached into my leather portfolio and placed a cream envelope on the table. It looked ordinary until they saw the embossed seal from Westlake Trust Services, our M&A escrow partner. "The notarized integrity clause," I said calmly. "Signed in 2018 by then CEO Robert Klein, approved by the board's compensation committee, and filed under the original merger agreement. A demotion following a verified fraud report constitutes an integrity retaliation event." Jason scoffed. "You're bluffing." "Really?" I tapped my phone screen. "Let's find out." I hit the speaker. A man's voice answered. "Westlake Trust Services Fiduciary Division. This is Robert speaking." "Hi, Robert, this is Amanda Lewis. Account verification 9423. Please confirm the trigger conditions for the integrity performance clause linked to Apex Systems compliance pool." There was a brief pause, then the clatter of keys. "One moment. Yes, I see the account. The trigger event was verified this morning. Upon confirmation of adverse employment action, a payout of $120 million will be released from the compliance incentive pool." Jason's face drained of color. "Wait, what? That's not possible," Mitchell stammered. "Please confirm," I said. Under Section 7.3, an employee demoted or terminated in retaliation for reporting regulatory fraud exceeding $10 million qualifies as a constructive termination event. The escrow funds are outside company control. The release is automatic silence. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then Jason exploded. "Cancel that transaction immediately." "I'm sorry, sir," the banker replied. "These are irrevocable instructions signed 5 years ago. The funds will transfer within 1 business day." I ended the call and leaned back. "You were saying, Jason?" His lips moved, but no sound came out. Claire's pen fell from her hand. Mitchell looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. I didn't gloat. Not yet. I just folded my hands. "You really should have read the merger documents before trying to humiliate me. I'm Amanda Lewis, 41 years old, Senior Compliance Analyst at Apex Systems, or at least I was until 10 minutes ago. When I joined the company back in 2017, Apex was merging with an aerospace firm twice its size. Everyone was scrambling: legal, finance, HR. That chaos was my playground. See, before Apex, I spent 8 years at a defense contractor's audit division. My job was to detect procurement fraud, shell vendors, and insider kickback schemes. The first thing they teach you in that world is to prepare for betrayal. The second thing is to protect yourself in writing. So, when I joined Apex during the merger, I negotiated a clause. If I ever filed a verified integrity report exposing major financial violations, and the company retaliated against me instead of investigating, I'd receive a payout from the compliance reserve pool. That pool was worth $120 million, money set aside to cover penalties from potential fraud exposure. I didn't think I'd ever need it until 3 months ago. It started small. A few odd invoices tied to vendor optimization consulting, but the amounts didn't make sense. $840,000 per month to a Delaware LLC with no employees. The authorizations are always signed by our CFO, Patricia Hale. I'd seen that pattern before. Fake vendors, shell companies, falsified cost centers, the kind of scheme that drains millions right under everyone's nose. So I did my job. I followed the paper trail. Over 8 weeks, I uncovered $47.6 million in fraudulent payments routed through 3 ghost vendors. Patricia had built her own golden pipeline. I submitted a detailed integrity report, 62 pages with financial flowcharts and verified bank statements. I expected an internal audit, maybe even quiet gratitude. Instead, Jason, her right-hand man, called me into his office 2 days later. "Amanda, you've been disruptive," he said. "You're not a team player. We need people who build trust, not suspicion." I'd been through enough corporate battles to recognize what was coming. The silent treatment from colleagues, the calendar invitations disappearing, the locked database folders, HR calling performance check-ins, classic retaliation choreography. So I waited, documented everything, every revoked access request, every email marked returned undeliverable, every meeting I was accidentally excluded from. And today, November 12th, 10 a.m., they made their move. The official demotion, the trigger. Jason was still staring at the table when I stood. "You wanted me gone," I said softly. "You should have fired me. But you didn't. You demoted me, and that's what cost you $120 million. He lunged forward. "You planned this." "No," I said, gathering my papers. "You did." I turned toward the door, my pulse steady. 6 years of preparation, of quiet patience had just detonated in the center of the company's power structure. As I walked out, I could hear Mitchell whispering. "Did she really just?" I smiled. "Yes, I really did." And the funny part, the $120 million wasn't even the endgame. That was just phase 1. When people ask how I managed to pull off a $120 million payout, I tell them the truth. It didn't start as revenge. It started as survival. Back in 2018, Apex Systems was a mess. The merger with Lauren Aerospace had doubled our contracts, but also doubled our corruption. I was 35 then, newly promoted, still naive enough to think doing the right thing mattered. During those months, I worked 14-hour days reviewing supplier integrations and cost structure reports that made no sense. Numbers that never added up, invoices without work orders, strategic partners who didn't exist outside of spreadsheets. I remember confronting my then manager, Tom Reynolds. "These vendor authorizations don't follow Pentagon compliance codes," I told him. He just smiled and said, "Amanda, it's merger chaos. Don't look too closely." That sentence stayed with me for years, so I started documenting everything. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd seen good people destroyed for less. I had a mentor back then, a quiet man named Edward Grant, former Air Force intelligence turned auditor. He once told me, "Never fight corruption empty-handed. Paperwork wins wars." That's when the idea of the clause began. During the merger, Apex and Lauren were creating a compliance incentive fund. $120 million set aside to encourage ethical reporting. The lawyers wanted to make it look good for regulators. I just saw a shield waiting to be forged. While HR and legal were drowning in integration documents, I drafted a small addition to my employment contract, a protection clause stating that if I reported verified financial misconduct and experienced retaliation before an investigation concluded, I'd receive an accelerated payout from that compliance pool. It sounded harmless. Corporate theater for integrity. The clause needed only 2 signatures: the outgoing CEO, Robert Clean, and the Compensation Committee Chair, Evelyn Dorsey. Robert was signing hundreds of merger papers a day. Evelyn was retiring in 3 weeks. Both signed without a question. I filed the notarized copy with Westlake Trust Services, our merger escrow bank, and sent a sealed duplicate to my attorney in Seattle. Then I locked the original in a safe deposit box. The whole process took 3 days and a little over $200 in notary fees. I never mentioned it again. For the next 6 years, I worked like any other employee. Early mornings, late nights, chasing deadlines, building trust. My department saved Apex millions by identifying waste in supplier contracts. I got awards, promotions, and polite applause at company town halls. They called me the watchdog. I wore it like a badge of honor. Then came Patricia Hale. She joined as CFO in 2020, fresh from a tech startup acquisition that regulators later investigated for accounting irregularities. Jason arrived with her, her so-called operations specialist, though everyone knew he was her enforcer. They talked a big game about streamlining operations and increasing liquidity. Translation: cut oversight, move faster. Ask fewer questions. The first year under Patricia felt different. She was charming at first. Compliments in meetings, invitations to highlight briefings, but it changed the moment I questioned a $9.4 million consulting retainer paid to a newly formed vendor in Delaware. She froze me out overnight. By early 2023, people in my department started disappearing. Resignations, sudden transfers, burnout, and yet the vendor list kept growing. That's when my instincts, honed by years of compliance work, started screaming. I began my investigation quietly after hours using mirrored backups of the finance system. The deeper I looked, the uglier it became. 3 shell companies, identical invoice templates, payment authorizations signed within minutes of submission, always by Patricia. She'd built a hidden siphon. When I reported it to the Internal Audit Committee in September, I thought Apex would do the right thing. Instead, I was escorted out of my own office pending a compliance review. They tried to isolate me. Calls unanswered. System access suspended. HR performance evaluations appearing in my inbox like clockwork. That's when I knew it was time. I drafted the integrity escalation letter. Simple, factual, and devastating. Attached every document, email, and transaction trace. I mailed it certified to Westlake Trust Services, copied my attorney, and submitted the internal report. I even recorded a short video on my phone, timestamped, explaining the retaliation sequence just in case something happened to me. When Jason called me into that conference room 2 weeks later, I already knew the outcome. I'd prepared for that exact moment since 2018. What they thought was humiliation was legally a trigger condition. The irony, the clause they ignored wasn't even hidden. It had been part of my digital HR file for 6 years. No one ever bothered to read it. After the meeting ended, I walked straight to the parking lot. The November air bit at my face, but I felt strangely calm. I sat in my car, exhaled, and whispered, "It's done." My phone buzzed. An email from Westlake confirming verification under review. I stared at it for a long minute. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real, but it was. I had followed every protocol, filed every report, and documented every act of retaliation. They had walked straight into the trap, one I'd built patiently, ethically, and completely within the law. Edward's voice echoed in my memory. Paperwork wins wars. This wasn't just a win. It was justice. Signed, sealed, and escorted, I turned the key in the ignition and drove away. My heart is steady for the first time in months. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Apex Systems had just declared war on the wrong person, and I was ready for every move they'd make. By the next morning, the silence was deafening. No congratulatory emails, no angry calls, just quiet. That's how corporations respond when they're cornered. Pretend nothing's happening. Hope it blows over. But I'd been through this before. When people are desperate, they get sloppy. At 8:43 a.m., I received a system notification. Access to Apex Compliance Network temporarily suspended due to administrative updates. There it was, the first official retaliation, neatly timestamped for my records. By 10:15, my name was removed from the executive email group. At 11 o'clock, my office badge failed at the elevator, and security told me my clearance level was being reviewed. I smiled. Each of those acts, every digital door closed behind me, was one more nail in their own coffin. Still, I couldn't let my guard down. Apex had a reputation for playing dirty. I knew they'd try to discredit me, maybe even intimidate me into signing a resignation agreement. So, I did what the Army veterans I used to work with called prepping the perimeter. I went home early that day and backed up everything. Emails, system logs, message threads, audit files, all encrypted and uploaded to an independent server my attorney controlled. I made 3 copies, one for him, one for my sister in Chicago, and one locked in a hard drive at a storage unit under my maiden name. You don't survive in compliance work by being careless. That night, I barely slept. I replayed the meeting in my head. The look on Jason's face when Westlake confirmed the payout. The disbelief, the fear, but beneath that there was something else. Anger. He wasn't just worried about the money, he was scared of what I knew. The next morning proved me right. At 7:12 a.m. my phone rang. Unknown number. When I picked up, a woman's voice said, "Amanda, this is Special Agent Karen Moss, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Do you have a moment?" The words froze me for a second. "Of course," I said. She continued, "We received documentation from Westlake Trust Services regarding your integrity clause and related financial irregularities. We'd like to schedule a meeting to review the evidence you've gathered." I felt my pulse quicken. They'd taken it seriously. "Absolutely. I can be available anytime," she paused. "And Amanda, don't tell anyone at Apex we've contacted you." When we ended the call, I sat staring at my coffee for nearly 10 minutes. The fraud I'd uncovered wasn't just corporate misconduct. It was federal-level crime. And now I was the key witness. By Friday, the company shifted from silence to full-scale containment. Jason called me into HR again. He dropped the fake politeness this time. "Amanda, you need to return all company property immediately. Laptops, key cards, files, everything." I placed them neatly on the table. "All here," I said. "You might want to check your legal department before deleting anything. Some of those systems are under federal review." He blinked. "Federal review? I assume you've spoken to your lawyer," I said, keeping my tone even. He didn't answer. Instead, Claire, the HR director, handed me a new paper. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. It's standard procedure during transition." I scanned it. 18 pages, clauses about non-disparagement, confidential information, and one paragraph that practically screamed, "Don't talk to law enforcement." I slid it back. "You can keep this." Jason leaned forward, voice sharp. "You're making a mistake, Amanda. Apex is a powerful company. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." That line almost made me laugh. "Jason," I said softly, "you already put me on the wrong side when you demoted me. The rest is just paperwork catching up." He slammed his pen on the table. "You think you've won something?" "I don't think," I replied. "I document." That afternoon, I met Agent Moss and her team at a small field office downtown. No suits, no drama, just professionals who knew what they were looking for. I handed them the encrypted drive and my full 62-page report. Moss read the executive summary silently, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "You realize this connects to 2 other cases we've been building." I raised an eyebrow. "Defense contracting?" She nodded. "Same structure. Fake vendors, Delaware registrations, rapid payouts, always signed off by the same CFOs moving between companies. Your report ties them together." For the first time, I felt the weight of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't about Apex anymore. It was a network, a pattern. Patricia Hale was just one node in a much larger scheme. Moss continued, "We'll need your cooperation. There may be subpoenas, interviews, depositions. You'll have protection under federal whistleblower statutes." "I'm not afraid," I said, and I meant it. As I left the office, the November sky was darkening. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching the city lights flicker on. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Jason and Patricia were scrambling, trying to figure out how to contain a storm that had already passed over them. The payout clause might have hurt them financially, but what was coming next would destroy their entire operation. And me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity, the kind you only get when you stop surviving and start fighting back. I wasn't just a compliance officer anymore. I was a witness, a trigger, and a storm they'd never seen coming. And the next phase was already in motion. The following Monday began like any other. Coffee, cold wind, and the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Except this time, the calls weren't from Apex. They were from reporters. The first voicemail was from a journalist at the Financial Tribune. "Miss Lewis, we're investigating allegations of procurement fraud at Apex Systems. We understand you filed the initial report. Would you be willing to comment?" I froze. The FBI had promised confidentiality during the preliminary stage. If the media knew, it meant one thing. The investigation had gone public. I opened my laptop. There it was. Front-page news. Federal investigation targets Apex Systems. CFO and senior executives accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Patricia Hale's smiling photo sat beside a headline that made my stomach twist. It wasn't the satisfaction I felt. It was a strange hollow calm. Years of suppressed truth had finally surfaced, but the weight of it was real. The article detailed everything. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, Delaware shell companies. Sources close to the matter confirmed the FBI raids on Apex headquarters over the weekend. Patricia was cooperating, which was corporate language for lawyered up. Jason wasn't mentioned by name, but I knew it was only a matter of time. By noon, my former coworkers began messaging me privately. Some were apologetic, others terrified. One text from a junior analyst stood out. "They're cleaning the house." Jason's office was emptied this morning. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. At 2 p.m., my attorney Michael called. "They're going to come after you next," he said. I sighed. "You mean reputationally?" "Exactly. Expect leaks, rumors, maybe claims you falsified evidence. Stay quiet. The FBI's case is strong, but Apex's legal team will try to muddy the water before indictments drop." He wasn't exaggerating. By evening, several blogs had published anonymous insider statements, suggesting my integrity report was motivated by personal grievances. They even dredged up my old divorce, claiming financial stress was my motive. It stung, but I'd expected it. Patricia's lawyers were experts in deflection. When cornered, people like her didn't fight the facts. They attacked the messenger. The next day, Agent Moss called. "Don't engage with the press," she warned. "We've obtained financial warrants. The Delaware bank accounts linked to Phantom Ridge and Laddie's Consulting are frozen. Hale's passport has been flagged for flight risk." "Any arrests yet?" I asked. "Soon," she said. "We're finalizing the charges. Your documentation was airtight." That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blur into the water. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about my job. I wasn't thinking about deadlines or compliance reports or who might stab me in the back next quarter. I was free, but freedom felt complicated. Part of me wanted to celebrate. Yet another part kept remembering the good people at Apex, the analysts, assistants, and engineers who'd done nothing wrong, but would now lose their jobs because of others' greed. That guilt was hard to shake. 3 days later, I got an unexpected call from Claire, the HR director who'd been in the room when Jason demoted me. Her voice trembled. "Amanda, they're saying the company's collapsing. The board just fired Patricia. Jason's gone. Half the executives are on administrative leave." "What did you do?" I almost laughed at the irony of that question. "What did I do, Claire?" I told the truth. There was a long pause. "They're saying you walked away with $120 million. Is that true?" "It's not that simple," I said quietly. "It wasn't their money. It was the compliance reserve meant to protect whistleblowers. They just never thought anyone would use it." She exhaled shakily. "Jason told us you were unstable, that you were sabotaging the company." "I know what he said," I replied. "That's how corruption works. It gaslights everyone around it." Her voice softened. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you did what you did. Maybe now they'll stop pretending integrity is just a word on a poster." After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window for a long time. I didn't look like someone who'd just won. I looked exhausted, like someone who'd been carrying a secret for too long. The next morning, the news exploded again. Apex CFO arrested in federal fraud probe. Multiple executives charged. The images were surreal. Patricia in handcuffs, escorted from her gated mansion. Jason's mugshot splashed across every news site. I should have felt vindicated, but instead there was a quiet sadness. I'd spent years fighting for honesty, and now that truth had finally prevailed, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. Later that afternoon, Agent Moss called with one final update. The board is settled with the SEC. Apex will pay $240 million in fines and restitution. They're also dissolving the Defense Contracts Division. You won't need to testify publicly. They're using your documentation as the foundation for the prosecution. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I walked to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the original envelope. The notarized clause that had started it all. The seal was still intact. 6 years ago, I'd written it to protect my job. Instead, it became the blueprint for something bigger. A system that finally punished the people who thought they were untouchable. I placed it back in the drawer and whispered, "One more phase left." Because even though the fraud had been exposed, my story wasn't over. Now it was time to decide what came next. How to turn this chaos into something meaningful. And that choice, I realized, would define everything that followed. 6 months later, I still woke up at 6 a.m. every day. Old habits die hard, even after you've walked away with a payout that could last 3 lifetimes. But my mornings looked different now. No rush hour traffic, no inbox full of urgent flags, no fake smiles in glass boardrooms, just quiet. I'd bought a small house on Bainbridge Island overlooking Puget Sound. Not a mansion, not a statement, just peace. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with coffee and watch the ferries drift by, thinking about how everything changed because of one signature on a document 6 years earlier. The $120 million transfer had gone through without a hitch. Westlake confirmed it. My attorney verified it, and Apex never got a cent back. They tried, of course, filed emergency motions in Delaware and Washington courts, but every ruling came down the same. The clause was valid, the conditions met, the payout legal. To the world, I was the woman who beat the system. To me, I was just someone who refused to stay silent. 2 months after the case broke, Agent Moss called again. "We've wrapped up the broader investigation," she said. Patricia Hale pleaded guilty to wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. 22 years, no parole. Jason Cooper took a plea deal. 5 years and forfeiture of all assets. Apex settled with the government for $240 million. I remember sitting in my kitchen, staring out the window as she spoke. I didn't feel joy. I felt closure, the kind that's quiet, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Then Moss added, "The Bureau wants to debrief you for a case study. Your documentation process, your clause, set a new precedent for whistleblower protection in corporate environments." That surprised me. My clause, something I'd written in a moment of fear and foresight, had become a model for reform. "So it worked," I said softly. "It worked," she confirmed. "Because you planned it like a professional, not a victim." When we hung up, I thought about that word. Victim. I'd been called that by reporters, by lawyers, even by friends. But I never felt like one. I hadn't fought for revenge. I'd fought for accountability. By spring, I'd started something new, a consulting firm called Integrity First Solutions. It began small. Me, my laptop, and a rented office near the marina. I helped companies build internal fraud protections, real ones, not the empty HR buzzwords. Within months, demand exploded. CEOs, compliance teams, even government contractors reached out asking me to review their systems. They didn't want another Apex. I hired 5 people, all former auditors or investigators burned by corporate politics. I told them the same thing during orientation. We don't just find fraud. We protect truth tellers because every time someone stays silent, corruption grows stronger. One of my first clients was a defense contractor under new management after Apex's collapse. Their general counsel, an older man with kind eyes, shook my hand and said, "We read your case in the news. You made a lot of people rethink what integrity really means." That moment hit harder than any wire transfer. Of course, not everyone saw me as a hero. The business press loved their narrative, the whistleblower who cashed out. They made it sound like I'd orchestrated a corporate heist. Maybe that's what kept people watching. The idea that I'd beaten the rich at their own game. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't stolen anything. I just enforced a contract no one bothered to read. One night, I received an email from Claire, the former HR director. She'd resigned after the scandal and was now working at a small nonprofit. It read, "I used to think compliance was paperwork. Then I watched what happened to you. Thank you for proving that ethics can still mean something. You made me rethink what kind of leader I want to be." I reread her words 3 times. Then I smiled and finally deleted the last folder on my desktop labeled Apex. It felt like erasing a scar that had already healed. Life after Apex wasn't glamorous. It was honest. I spent my days helping others navigate the same systems that once tried to bury me. And in that work, I found something far more valuable than the payout. Purpose. One morning, I got a letter forwarded from my lawyer. It was from a woman in Texas, a mid-level accountant at a logistics firm. "Miss Lewis," it said, "I watched your story. I found a fraud scheme at my company, and I was terrified to speak up. But after reading what you did, I documented everything and went to the board. They're investigating now. You gave me courage." That letter reminded me why I'd done it all. Because courage doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from being scared and doing it anyway. Sometimes I still think about that day in the conference room. The moment Jason signed my demotion letter, not realizing he detonated his own downfall. It's strange how something so small, a single signature, can alter so many lives. If I've learned anything, it's this. Integrity isn't a department or a slogan. It's a choice. One you make long before anyone's watching. People ask if I do it all again, knowing the stress, the loneliness, the public scrutiny. My answer is always the same. Yes, I tell them every single time. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't money or recognition. It's peaceful. The kind that comes when you know you did what was right, even when everyone told you not to. And that more than any payout is what I live with every morning when the sun hits the water and I whisper to myself, mission accomplished.